Hello Facebook, hello, greetings. June Allen here, your racial sobriety mentor from juneallen.net. So let me just get Instagram fired up. Checking connection. I hope my beads are not going to make too much noise. Just let me know if my beads make too much noise. If they rustle too much, I might have to take them off. Hi, thanks for joining. Thanks for joining. I am just getting Instagram fired up and then we can begin. Okay. So, I imagine there's going to be quite a lot of interest in today's topic. So, we will see how we get on. Right, so for those of you that are just joined, my name is June Allen from juneallen.net, and I teach black women how to heal from the impact of racism with racial sobriety and personal empowerment. Hi Sherry, gosh, I haven't seen you for ages. Hello, I hope you're well. So today's topic is all about how do you know if you're the toxic person in the relationship? You know, it's very easy for us to blame everybody else and go, she did this, he did that. My parents did this, my parents did that, you know. So I want to talk about that today. I saw it in a Facebook group and I thought, oh my God, what an amazing question. So I thought I'm nicking that one for my live stream today because I know I had a lot to say on the topic. So so we're sharing about that today. But before I get into the topic, I am going to share some housekeeping as always. So the first piece of housekeeping is that at the moment is the Racial Sobriety Conference that I've been doing. It's my 9-year anniversary sobriety birthday, and I wanted to celebrate it by putting on a virtual conference. So every day since Saturday, which was the actual birthday. Thank you, Sherry. Every day since Saturday, I've been talking to different people. We've had speakers on, and today we've got some other fellows and stuff in recovery that are going to be sharing on different things. So far we've had Saturday I did a talk on is racism an addiction to power, and then on Sunday we had, what did we have on Sunday? We had Dr. Andrew Asibong. Oh my God, that session was so powerful. He's a psychotherapist based in North London. And he was basically talking about, we spoke about the whole thing around racial trauma and how therapy can kind of help to heal racial trauma, and also how it can support you in your recovery process. It was so powerful. Don't worry if you've missed any of those. You can still get the replays. If you go to heal.juneallen.net, that's the link in my bio. If you're watching on Facebook, the main link on there, it's heal.juneallen.net, and you can still get copies of you can still join live if you want to, but obviously the ones that have already gone, you're not going to be able to see them again. You're going to have to get the replays to see all those again. But that was really amazing. And then last night now we had Yvonne Douglas. She's also a therapist healer, and she shamanic as well. She's a shamanic healer as well, and she was talking about the whole concept of spiritual abuse and how to reclaim your spirituality. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation. She talked about spirit guides and all of that kind of stuff, and talked about how a lot of the stuff that happened to us kind of basically took us away from our African spirituality, and how she was able to unpick a lot of that to kind of reclaim her spirituality on her own cultural African terms. And it was just a beautiful conversation. So if you want to hear all of those, and we've still got some amazing things that are going to be happening throughout the rest of the week. Tonight we're going to be talking about interracial sponsorship. So if you're in recovery, if you've got a white sponsor, are you able to tell the truth to your sponsor? Are you able to share with your sponsor about the racial aspect of your sobriety? Because this is one of the things that seems to come up a lot with the people that I work with in and out of recovery. Is the whole thing around not feeling safe to be able to share the kind of the racial aspect of their journey with their white sponsors or white fellows. So we're going to be talking to the lady that's going to be doing the guest chair speaker tonight. Is going to be talking about interracial sponsorship and how to kind of navigate it. So it's going to be really good. So if you're interested in that, you click the link in the bio, go to heal.juneallen.net, and you can get your ticket to the conference. So the conference is going to be on until Sunday. Sunday is the 9th day. So yeah, I really hope you can join us if you're free. It's from 8 o'clock in the evenings. It's between sort of an hour, 90-minute meeting. And what I've done is I've actually taken the structure from the 12 steps and I've actually translated it into something which is more culturally appropriate. I've just translated it into something that's just going to make a lot more sense for for people of colour, for black people in recovery. So if you're interested in that, please join us. It's really good, really good. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's just a beautiful space to be in. So join us if you're around later. So that's number one. Number two is on the 12th of June, which is next Wednesday. Myself and my business partner are going, or my business partner, Faith Aguga, is going to be hosting it. I'm just kind of, I'm going to be looking after the space. But she's going to be doing a workshop from 5 minutes from Bond Street about absent fathers and wounded daughters. She's going to take you through a process, and so you can understand how the absent relationship, the absent father, how that impacts your relationships as an adult. And she's not just going to be talking about absent fathers in the sense that absent fathers are they're physically absent. She's also going to be talking about it as well to in terms of being emotionally absent as well. So that is going to be a very powerful workshop. She did one last year about mothers and wounded daughters, and that was incredibly powerful. So if you're interested in that, that's next Wednesday at, I need to do a couple of things actually. That was 6:30. It's 5 minutes from Bond Street. So if you're interested in that, join us next Wednesday for that. That's going to be very, very powerful. The third thing that I want to talk to you about is the Ghana trip. I'm so excited about that. The Ghana trip is happening in November from the 10th to the 16th this year. And we're going to be doing a launch for the Ghana trip, which is going to be on the 15th of June. That's next Saturday. Yeah, next Saturday, this Saturday before Father's Day. Yeah. So if you're interested in that, it's going to be in the evening on Saturday, the 15th. And it's basically a launch to launch the Ghana trip. So if you want to join a group of black women to kind of find the journey, take the journey back home to yourself, Faith and I are going to be doing loads of workshops out there. And also this is kind of like in alignment with what the Ghanaian government are going to be doing. They've got a campaign on at the moment called Year of Return, where they're encouraging the African diaspora from all over the globe to come home to Ghana. And so it just feels very special that Faith and I have chosen to do this retreat at the same time. It kind of feels so much in alignment because we've been talking about it for a couple of years, but it's actually happening this year. So really, really excited about that. So if you're interested in that, and you've got some, mother wounds, father wounds, codependency issues or whatever, you can join us in Ghana. If you've not worked with Faith or I before and you'd like an opportunity to kind of experience that, when you click the link in the bio and sign up for your interest in the Ghana trip, you will also get 3 resources where Faith and I have worked together in the past, and you'll get those for free. So the first one is Did Your Black Mother Betray You? The second one is about Black mindfulness, and the third one is about boundaries, wounded daughters and relationships. So click the link in the bio and sign up for the Ghana trip, and then you will have an opportunity to get access to those 3 workshops. Hi Rose, thanks for joining. So those are the 3 issues that I have. Those are the 3 not issues. Those are the 3 bits of housekeeping that I have to share with you so far. So for those of you that have just joined, my name is June Allen from juneallen.net, and I teach black women how to heal from the impact of racism with racial sobriety and personal empowerment. So what is racial sobriety? Racial sobriety is a kind of twist on some of the stuff that I've learned in recovery, and it's all about being able to stand in your own truth, being able to stand in who you are as a black person without apology. So just for those of you that don't know my story, I came into recovery from addiction to self-hate, codependency, dysfunctional relationships, all of that stuff. When was it? 2009 I went to my first meeting. 2010 I got a sponsor and started working the steps. But what I learned from that experience is that there was no cultural context. There was no cultural context in the sense that we're still living under the system of racism. So as a black woman, I'm still being oppressed. And I needed some sort of understanding, some sort of process to be able to not only deal with the whole thing about living under the system of racism today, but also some understanding and cultural context around, you know, the ancestral stuff and you know, all of the stuff that's going on in our communities that so many of us are confused about inside our relationships. I needed some more cultural context. So with reading and from doing some psychotherapy training myself, which is still ongoing, and just being completely obsessed with kind of understanding the whole concept of the psychology of racism, I began to talk a lot more with other black people in recovery. I began to read a lot more. I began to just, I don't know, I just felt so much more connected to my ancestors. And as a result of that, I was able to transform and translate a lot of the stuff that I was reading into something that has become what I'm doing today. I began to share a lot more about that with other black people, and other black people were sort of like, oh my God, you know, I feel so relieved. I understand what you're saying. This makes so much sense. I'm giving people tools. All of the stuff that I've learned from a lot of these white institutions, I've managed to translate them into something that works at a cultural level for what we need as a community. So that is just a little bit of background around, you know, how I got to the place where I am today. So thank you so much for joining me today in this space. So we're now going to get into the content, but I just want to say that if I've got 3 requests on this broadcast. Number 1, if there's anything that I say that you don't understand or you're not sure about or whatever, please drop a note in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer those questions. I understand that this is a public platform, so if you don't feel confident in sharing any questions and stuff or the detail on the comments below, send me a direct message and I will answer your question there. The second request I have, that if you know somebody who would benefit from this conversation, tag them, share it with them, let them know about me, let them know about the topic and all the rest of it, and show them where my page is so they can obviously get all the source and the juice that I'm sharing today. And the third thing is, if there's stuff that I share that resonates with you, if there's stuff that you know that you really identify with, that it's really helped you at the end of the broadcast, then obviously, you know, again, drop it in the comments or send it to my direct message if you feel comfortable doing that. So those are the 3 requests I have. So now let's get into today's content. So the question was, I saw it in this Facebook group today, how do you know if you're the toxic person in the relationship? How do you know that? Because so many of us are so quick to sort of talk about what everybody else is doing and what they're doing and what they're not doing, that you know, how do you actually know? Everybody else thinks that everybody else is the toxic person, so then how do you know if you're the toxic person? So really important to talk about that today. So I have 7 things I want to share. 7 things I want to share with you that are going to help you to answer this question. So number 1, first of all, you have to define what is toxic. What is toxic behavior? Because people throw this term out a lot, but do you actually understand from your perspective what is the toxic behavior? What is the behavior? Is it the communication styles? Are you shouting at each other? Do you avoid each other? Is it silent treatment? Is it passive aggressive or whatever it is? You have to be really clear about what defines toxic behavior. Even though you might feel justified in doing it, at the end of the day, if the common goal is not coming from a place of love and compassion, then it might well just be toxic. If your intent is to hurt the other person through your behavior, or to hurt yourself, because it's not just about what you do to the other person, it's about what you do to yourself, then that behavior is toxic. If you treat yourself in a certain way as a result of what somebody else has said or done, even though you might not have hurt the other person, that's still toxic behavior. Does that make sense? So you have to not only look at how you're engaging with that other person for the behavior to be toxic, but also how you treat yourself. Because if you're treating yourself in a toxic way, the chances are you're probably treating somebody else in a toxic way as well. At some level, there's toxicity there that needs to be looked at. So number 1 is you have to be able to define what the toxic behaviors are. Write them down, get your journal out, and be intentional about it. You know, be intentional. Hi Terry, thanks for joining. You have to be intentional about what the toxic behavior is, and understand what the communication styles are. So definitely write them down. The second part is, and this one might sting a little bit, okay, so stay with me on this, but you stay with me a little bit on this one. The second part of knowing if you are in a toxic relationship is, what is your part? What part are you playing in that toxic dance, because at the end of the day, it takes two people to create a toxic relationship. It's not just one person. It takes two people to take, even if it means just your toxicity is the fact that you're staying in that space, or you're allowing yourself to be spoken to in a certain way, or you're just abandoning your own needs or whatever, and you're just allowing that person to behave in a certain way. The fact that you're staying in that space, or staying in that, not even the fact that you're just staying in that relationship, but even if that argument is toxic and you're choosing to stay in that toxicity instead of removing yourself, you have a role to play in that toxicity. Does that make sense? So you have to be willing to look at it. You have to be willing. Yes, Terry, thank you for that. Terry says, great work, keep it up. Thank you, darling. You've got to be willing to look at your own toxicity. Everybody likes to blame everybody else. Black men do this, black women do that. But nobody wants to own their own part in that situation. The relationship is not going to heal. The relationship or the situation is not going to be resolved if you're not willing to look at your own part. You know, you have to be willing to look at your own part. Is it a case of, as well, in that relationship, do you feel like you have to tread around on eggshells around that person? Are you treading on eggshells in that relationship? Do you feel like you can't speak up and you can't share what you really think in that relationship? If that is the case, then obviously that person is behaving in a toxic manner. Or it might be that that person is just being honest, but you don't know how to deal with somebody that's being honest. And the toxicity from your part is that you don't know how to show up for yourself, that you don't know how to deal with somebody else's emotion because you're not grounded in yourself. If you're not grounded in your own sense of self, then what other people say and do is going to impact you in a negative way. So it's going to feel toxic to you, even if the other person's not being toxic. It might feel toxic for you because you're not grounded in your own sense of self. And what I mean by that is you don't know who you are. You don't know who you are. You don't have any sense of value. You don't have any sense of self-confidence. And that can happen to us a lot as black people living under the system of racism, because that is how racism operates. Racism operates by constantly eroding who we are, constantly eroding our sense of self, constantly eroding our blackness, constantly making us feel that who we are and that our melanin is defective. So in the sense that when we internalize that stuff from living under the system of racism, that is how it's going to play out in our relationships, because racism is going to make us feel bad about ourselves. So therefore, when we're in relationship with other people, it's going to get triggered. That stuff is going to get triggered. And so it's really, really important. Yes, Terry's saying communication, i.e. correspondence, is key. It's 100%. If you can't communicate in a way that is going to empower that relationship, then it's not going to work. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this conference, because again, it's an opportunity. This is one of the things that's great about recovery as well, actually, and just doing this empowerment work. The internal work is about, who am I? Who am I in this relationship? Who am I in this situation? Who am I being in this relationship? Am I able to show up as myself in this relationship, or do I have to show up as somebody else? Do I have to show up as somebody else in order to stay in this relationship? Do I have to silence myself in order to stay in this relationship? Shari's saying, yes, June, we can blame others, but often we don't know ourselves. We can become the victim. Exactly. And that victim mentality, again, is something that is kind of been formed off the back of, and in a lot of times, racism, because we're being constantly victimized. We feel powerless. We feel powerless over racism. That's going to feed the fact that we don't have a sense of self. And again, that internalization of low self-esteem and shame from racism is going to bleed out in our relationships. And so we can also become victimized in our relationships. If you don't have a true core sense of self and who you are as a person, you're not going to be able to communicate who you are to somebody else. And that's when you start to attract people like narcissistic people, because narcissists love people that don't have no sense of self, because then they can control that person. They can control what you think, they can control what you wear, they can control what you say, what is right, because you don't have a sense of self to be able to set boundaries with that person and say, actually, don't speak to me like that. That doesn't work for me. Please don't behave that way. This doesn't, when you're confident in who you are as a person, you are able to set healthy boundaries with that person. And you're not going to attract people that are going to take advantage of you. You're not going to attract these narcissists who think that they can do what they want to you and not feel any type of way. And that you're going to keep going back to people that are unavailable. One of the things that's going to be important about this workshop that I'm going to be doing next with Faith Agugu next Wednesday, these are the type of conversations that, that are important to have, that we're going to be exploring in the workshop, because it's all about how your relationship with your dad or absent fathers is going to impact who you are in a relationship. How does it, if you look at your relationship with your dad, how does that impact how you show up in the world as a woman with men? How does that show up? And this is something I'm going to be talking more about this topic over the next few days. Actually, I'm going to be doing a few more live streams on the dad-daughter relationship. So stay tuned and make sure you click make sure your notifications on for when I go live, because I'll be talking a lot more about that. But it is really important to look at, your different relationships, and it's, how you grow up as well, but being able to look at your part and look at your own behavior and who you are in that relationship is an important part of understanding whether you're the toxic person in the relationship or not. You've got to be willing to look at it. If you're not willing to look at it and you're stuck in the blame, you know what, you're just going to end up attracting the same person over again, but just with a different face. That's what's going to happen. You get stuck in the blame and thinking, oh, that person is this, that and the other, he's this, he's that. If you don't do the internal work, you dump him and you go and get into a relationship with somebody else, you are going to attract exactly the same person with the same traits until you heal that wound. Because that's how the universe works. The universe wants you to heal. The universe wants you to get over this stuff, and it's going to keep sending you the same people with the same traits, with the same stuff going on, until you heal that wound, until you heal your own quote unquote toxicity. You've got to deal with your own stuff. You got to take responsibility for it. That's the only way we're going to heal as a community. If you're not doing your own work, you can't expect the community is not going to heal just by getting together as a community. Community healing requires personal responsibility. Community healing requires personal responsibility. Hi Sarah, thanks for joining. So yeah, you've really got to be willing to look at that stuff and being willing to speak up and to look at your own stuff. You've really got to do that. The third thing to think about if you're the toxic person in the relationship is, are you focused on trying to control the other person? Now, this is another one that's going to sting a little bit. Are you focused on trying to control the other person? Terry saying, we need to become one. You're my left, I'm your right. Exactly. Everybody has to, both people in the relationship have to take responsibility for themselves inside that relationship. If one person is focused on trying to change the other person or control the other person, then that's going to be toxicity right there, because the other person is not going to stand for that. And why should they? You can't change other people. I had to learn this the hard way. And this is something that I'm so grateful for my healing process, because this is one of the things that I would do in relationships. I was so obsessed with trying to control the other person and thinking that if I just made the other person behave the way I want them to behave, then I'm going to feel safe. I'm going to feel loved if that other person behaves a certain way. I'm going to feel loved if that person buys me something because I behave a certain way. I'm going to feel loved if I just shame that person as well, tell them that they try and control them by being mean to them. I've been in those sort of relationships in the past because I didn't understand that I had to look at myself. Why was I choosing that person? Why was I so obsessed with trying to control the other person? Because I didn't want to look at myself. I didn't want to look at my own wounds. I didn't want to look at that stuff. And this is why why I speak so, number one, I speak so openly about this stuff, and number two, why I'm creating platforms like the conference, the Father's Day thing, the retreat, because it's all about focusing on what you're doing, not what the other person is doing. That's where a lot of people go wrong. They spend so much time obsessing about what their boyfriend or what their man is doing or what the woman is doing, but they're not focusing on, okay, well, what have I brought into that space? It takes two people to make a toxic relationship, not one. It takes two people to make a toxic relationship. So if you're spending time thinking that I'm going to try and control that person, I want to look at his phone, I want to check his emails, I want to see what he's doing on social media. Really? Is that really a healthy relationship? Is that really a healthy relationship where your time is spent obsessing about what that person is or is not doing? Is that really going to help? Is that really going to help the relationship? It's not. Because quite often what's underneath a lot of that is mistrust. Mistrust of yourself. Or not trusting that that person is going to respect and love you enough to respect you as a person without have to go out and do all of these things. If you have to spend all of your time checking and trying to control what this person's doing, that's got a lot to do with your own mistrust and probably historical stuff, rather than it is to do with that person. You've got to look at what's underneath a lot of that. And if that person has behaved in a way that's broken your trust, your part in that is, why are you choosing to stay with somebody that you don't trust? So number 3, you've got to look at, why are you trying to compulsively control somebody else that clearly is not available for a relationship? If that's what you feel like you have to do, that person is either not available because they've either proved themselves to be not trustworthy, or you have historical issues around men or dad or whatever it is that you haven't dealt with, and that stuff is being triggered. That stuff is being triggered, and you need to look at that. Because that's not helping you. That's the relationship just becomes painful. Because you're constantly having to check what the other person is doing. That's not a life. That's not a relationship. It's not a relationship. You've got to be able to feel safe in that relationship. And if you don't feel safe, you've got to be willing to explore why you don't feel safe. And it may not have nothing to do with that person. It may not have anything to do with the man that you're seeing why you don't feel safe. But you've got to be willing to explore that. You've got to be willing to explore that. That's why doing the internal work is so important, because you've got to be willing to find the courage to look beneath the surface behaviours. You've got to be willing to look at what's underneath it. You've got to be willing to look at your history. Not just your history in terms of, your immediate history with your family of origin, but you've also got to be willing to look at your history in terms of the history of the slave trade and all of that, and how that the slave trade and the trauma and stuff, how that has impacted and been passed down, what's been passed down in your family. That is part of the racial sobriety conversation that I have with my mentees and the stuff that I teach. It's not just about what's going on in the here and now, what's going on in your family of origin now, in this generation now. It's about looking back, looking at how slavery has impacted how you deal with things. So it's important to think about that. So when you're compulsively trying to you're compulsively obsessing about what the other person is doing, think about what that is doing to you. What is that doing to you, your self-respect? How is that eroding your dignity? That is really, really important. So that's number 3. Number 4, the 4th way to know that you're the toxic person in the relationship is, are you externalizing your worth? Does your happiness, does you being able to feel like any sense of a person, does your attractiveness and all of that kind of stuff, is that dependent on what your man says? Are you confident in who you are as a woman or as a man without that person telling you so? Because this is another thing that is really, really important for you to look at, because that's when the codependency and stuff can come in, because you're always looking for affirmation from other people. You're always looking for somebody else to make you feel good about who you are. And that in of itself is kind of a recipe for insanity in many ways, because then you're always, you're never going to feel comfortable with who you are. You're never going to feel safe with who you are as a person, because you're always externalizing it. You're handing over your power, your worth, your self-esteem, your confidence is in the hands of somebody else. If you're externalizing your worth, you're handing over your power to somebody else, and that's when the wounding can be so much deeper. If you're in a relationship with somebody else where you're relying on them to make you feel good about who you are, that's when they can really wound you, because you don't have any sense of self. You don't have any sense of self. And to give you some cultural context around that as well, living under the system of racism can also feed that behaviour, because racism also creates a situation where we feel like, as black women or black men, that we're not pretty enough, or we're not handsome enough, or we're not good enough, or whatever as people. We're not attractive enough because there's so much anti-blackness out there telling us that we're not good. So when we're having these conversations about externalizing your worth, it's important to have the conversations around, how has racism impacted how I feel about myself? And how does that bleed into my relationships? How do I externalize my self-worth in a relationship with my partner because of how I feel about myself, or because of what society has told me who I am as a black woman? Does that make sense? So you're looking at the external aspect of it, and you're also looking at how that's bled into my relationship as well. How does that impact how I feel about myself in that relationship? It's important to look at it all from a holistic perspective, because then it's going to give you so much more understanding. It's going to give you so much more understanding as to your behaviour and how you feel about things and how you feel about yourself. It's important. The only thing you should be externalizing is your support network and your growth. That's the only thing you externalize, but you shouldn't be externalizing your worth. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. You need to be, sorry, just 1 second. So Sarah's saying, can I invite others to join this live? Absolutely. I think you can tag people, Sarah. If you write their names in the comments, then they'll be able to come into the live. Thank you for inviting, or you can share it on your page. If you share it on your personal page, Sarah, then people again will be able to see what I'm talking about. So let me just say that again for the people in the back that didn't understand about, you need to stop externalizing your worth. The only thing that you should be externalizing is your support network and your growth. Now, what I mean by that, when I say externalizing your support, it means that you need to be going to people who are further along in the journey than you. It could be a therapist, or it could be a recovery partner, or it could be a mentor or a spiritual advisor, or whoever it is. You can externalize your support network and your growth, because that is going to help give you an understanding of who you are. So you're not going to a partner and saying, instead of going to a partner and saying, make me feel loved, make me feel good about myself. You're not stuck in that cycle. Instead of that, you're actually going to somebody who is able to teach you about, okay, here are some of the reasons why you don't love yourself. Let's talk about what's underneath the reasons why you feel like you have to keep going to your man to give you a sense of worth. This is the stuff that I teach as well. If anybody is out there that wants more insight into this stuff and that wants to learn about what's underneath all that, that crazy making behaviour, you can click the link in the bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. And you can find details on there on how you can work with me one-on-one. And I can help you to work through this stuff, to really understand where that lack of worth has come from, be it cultural in terms of white supremacy, or whether it's in your family. What was your relationship like with your dad? What are the relationships like with with the men in your community? Do you have a community of black men in your community? That what are the conversations that you heard growing up? Do you have brothers? What are the relationship like with your brothers, be it siblings or the brothers in your community? What are those relationships like? What are those relationships like, and how do you feel about yourself when you're among other black men? What does it trigger in you? This is how you're really going to begin to heal, and you're really going to begin to understand and explore what is really underneath a lot of that behavior around externalizing your worth, because you'll find that a lot of the core relationships that you had when you were a child, your relationship with your dad, the relationship with your stepdad or whatever caregivers you had when you were young, that is really going to help you to understand the relationships that you have with men in the now. One of the relationships that I had that was really, really powerful, there was a time about 6 years ago, I started I decided to pick a black male therapist. I decided that I wanted to dig a lot deeper with the stuff around, my dad and my relationships that I'd had with men that were really painful. I had relationships with black men that were really painful. And so I needed to have the experience of sitting in front of another black man and to be able to be vulnerable and to tell the truth without there being no chance at all of there being any romantic involvement or anything like that. I just needed to be able to sit in front of another black man and to be able to reflect and have those conversations with another black man where I felt safe and it was boundaried and I could just be really honest. And what came up at a lot of those sessions at the time, I was with this therapist for about 6 years and it was really powerful. A lot of shame came out. A lot of shame came out. I realised that a lot of that shame was linked to the external stuff around living under the system of racism and the anti-blackness and stuff that I'd absorbed about what it means to be a black woman. And also a lot of stuff that I'd also absorbed from being in relationships with men that were abusive as well. Sometimes it was physical, sometimes it was emotional, sometimes it was verbal. It was really painful. But to be able to speak to another black man and actually have these honest conversations was really important. And also I was able to talk through a lot of the stuff that I went through, the relationship with my dad. My dad was there physically, but emotionally, the relationship with my dad felt quite disconnected. I felt very disconnected from my dad as a child. And it was important for me to have those conversations with my therapist at the time, this black guy, to find out, what that was about and how do I really feel about that? How do I access the emotion? Am I numb from it? Am I numb from it or not? Or how do I feel about it? Am I angry? Am I not angry? Am I sad? It's important to have these conversations and be honest about how we feel about these things, because when these things are spoken out, and when they're spoken out in a space that is safe, then it can be a very, very powerful way to transform your relationships in the now, because that stuff is not festering under the surface. I had a very, very powerful conversation yesterday in the conference with a psychotherapist who lives in North London, Andrew Asibong. Amazing session. And this guy's become a very, very dear friend of mine. And, when I was being able to build healthy relationships, friendships, being able to build healthy friendships with other black men was very, very powerful, because I was able to really look at the stuff that I didn't want to look at in my love relationships, because there was no way that I was going to be in any sort of relationship with Andrew or anything like that. So it's almost like, because we're friends, we're able to have conversations about certain things, and I can observe my own behavior. So black male friendships that I have now, where I can speak honestly, are a really great opportunity. And this is another one of the great things about having black male friends in recovery. One of the most amazing things about having black male friends in recovery is that you get to practice a lot of this stuff. And you can do it in a boundaried way. As long as you understand where the boundaries are, and you've got to be really, be secure in those boundaries. Otherwise it could get a bit, inappropriate. And obviously I'll talk a lot more about that. Actually tomorrow, which is Wednesday, I am talking about, in the conference, about the 13th step, which is all about how to set appropriate boundaries and stuff around and keep yourself safe from predators in recovery. Okay, so because I've experienced that as well. Thankfully my boundaries are quite firm, so I was able to, I wasn't able to be taken advantage of in the way that this person thought they were going to take advantage of me, because I've got shit hot recovery. But that's an important part of it as well. But I'm talking about when you've been in recovery for quite a bit of time and you've built up your boundaries and you understand the concept of boundaries and you've got more of a core sense of self, then when you start to build more friendships with other black people in recovery, friendships and stuff like that, you can really start to see, you know, where your wounds are around other black men. And that can be really powerful. That can be really powerful. So it's important to really think about, you know, how you externalize your worth, why you externalize your worth. You know, there was a lot of women out here, and you know what? I'm probably going to get shot down for saying this, but there's a lot of women out there, you know, that are using their bodies inappropriately in order to, again, externalize their worth. They think if I wear less clothes, if I go out, you know, half naked or whatever, then that's going to make me feel good about myself because men are going to look at me. And men are going to approach me in a certain way, but you end up being objectified. So the attention, what these women want in many ways is actually not the love what they really want. That's the only way that they feel that they can get that sort of attention by dressing inappropriately. You know, and that's not me judging them. I can see how that behavior is a call for love. I can see how that behavior is a call for love. You know, and what I feel towards these women is compassion. You know, and people can kind of wrap it up like, oh yeah, she's expressing herself and she's really connected to us, and she may well be doing all of those things. But what type of men are you attracting? What type of men are you attracting by choosing to do that? And really, how do you feel about yourself at a core level if you feel like that is the only way that you deserve to be in a relationship with a man, by doing that? You know? And please hear me, I'm not saying that to be judgmental. I'm not saying that to be judgmental. I'm saying that because, you know, to just think, to get you to explore and to think about why you do certain things. Why you do certain things. Or why you feel the need to behave a certain way in order to feel good about who you are. It goes back to this whole thing again about externalizing your worth. That's one of the ways that women externalize their worth. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. Your body is sacred. Your body is sacred. Your body is a temple, and you don't have to do those things. You know, you don't have to do those things in order to feel good about yourself. It's about uncovering what is underneath that stuff. What is underneath it? And to begin to rebuild your sense of self and to rebuild who you are so that you can still be proud of who you are without feeling that you have to get that sort of attention because you don't feel like you deserve anything else. You know? So that's number 4, externalizing your worth. And number 5. Number 5 is about, you know, I've kind of been talking about this already. You know, number 5 is about asking yourself the question, you know, is the behavior, is it triggering a historical wound? Is it triggering a historical wound? Is it a dad wound? Is it an abandonment wound? It might not necessarily be a father wound, it could be a mother wound. Do you feel so abandoned by your parents that you feel, you know, being in a relationship triggers all of the pain that you had when you were growing up? You know, this is something that I've worked through quite a lot in my process, because I realised that when I was a child, I didn't attach to my parents. I didn't attach particularly to my mother in a way that was enough for me to, you know, for me to give me a sense of self when I was a child. I didn't attach to my mother for different reasons. I didn't attach to her appropriately. And so what happens as a result of that is that I internalized a lot of shame. I internalized a lot of confusion around the whole thing about intimacy. You know, the whole thing around intimacy for me became something that felt dangerous. It felt dangerous and it felt unsafe because I didn't have an early experience of attachment that felt safe, you know. So Sarah's saying, just having a look at these comments, your body is sacred. I think this is something that needs to be taught, especially for women who were sexually or physically abused by males in or outside of the, I can't read the last bit of it. I'm thinking about you saying about the father relationship. Yeah, I mean, that is 100%, 100%. And I think, you know, it was hard for me to kind of say that. It was hard for me to say that, Sarah. But I think it needs to be said, because I'm not saying that all women who dress like that have got that going on, but I'm saying that there are a lot that do, you know. So I think that, you know, looking at the historical wound and really being able to be honest with yourself about why. It's about constantly being able to have the courage to ask yourself, why are you doing that? What's underneath it? What is underneath it? What is the historical trigger? And for us as black people as well, you have to remember this as well. It's not just about the father relationship. It's also about remembering the stuff that was passed down from the slave plantations as well. Because a lot of us have got trauma in our DNA, trauma in our bodies, trauma in our psyches that weren't anything to do with us. Stuff that is so unconscious that we can't even remember it, but that stuff has been passed down to us. So understanding the cultural context, the historical context of our behaviour is also really, really important. Really, really important, because when you understand the historical context and you've got a space to explore where you are in this moment, the context, and also understanding that there's the white supremacy context as well. It's a lot to take on, which is why we need to start having these conversations, and we need these safe spaces. We need safe spaces to be able to have these conversations. You know, we need these safe spaces to have these conversations. Sherry's saying it's fashionable in music and media to lack boundaries, hence why we have to have the courage to challenge this imagery for our children's sake. Oh my God, that, you know, that is it. Sherry, thank you for sharing that. And I think that, you know, and that's what I meant when I said about, you know, some people will talk about, oh, you know, these women are just expressing their sexuality and all the rest of it. Because, you know, seeing a lot of other, you know, these women sort of twerking on stage with kind of like a bit of string, you know, with just nothing but a bit of string or whatever, you know, for me personally, that's not empowerment for me. For me, that's not empowerment. I don't understand how that can be empowerment. You know? I mean, for me, it's just, it just feels like objectification. It's objectification, and there isn't a sacredness in that. I mean, the twerking thing as a concept is something that our ancestors used to do a long time ago for different reasons, and it was a ritual, a dance ritual that they did for many different things. But objectification and trying to keep a man was not one of them. Maybe in your own relationship, you know, your own one-on-one relationship, that there's a context from that perspective. But I'm talking about going out and doing it publicly, you know, as a means to disrespect who you are or denying your own dignity. I don't think our ancestors meant that. I don't think our ancestors meant for us to be doing that. But again, I think that a lot of women are doing that from a place of not feeling good about themselves, not being honest about, you know, their low self-esteem and their low self-worth, and they think that the only way that they can be seen or valued, and this is something that's taught under the system of racism as well, the only way that we're acceptable or seen or valued is if we're half naked twerking. You know, and I'm probably going to get slack for saying that, but that's how I feel about it. And again, I'm not saying that to judge anyone. I'm not saying that to upset anyone or offend anyone. I'm saying it because I want people to really start to explore why they're doing it. Not what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Are you doing it because you need to externalize your worth? Are you doing it because you didn't get the love and attention that you needed from your dad? So you do that behavior because you want other men to see you. You want to be seen and heard. And the only way that you can be seen and heard is to behave in that way. This disrespecting your body. You know? So it's about asking yourself why that you're doing these things. Number 6. That's number 5. About the historical triggers and the wounds and all of that kind of stuff. Number 6 is about the 6th way to know that you're in a toxic. If you're the toxic one in the relationship, is, you know, are you open to feedback? Are you open to having a dialogue about you know, if somebody says something about you, are you open to thinking, you know, is that behavior, could there be some truth in that behavior for me? Could there be some truth in that behavior about who I am? Are you willing to sit in front of a therapist or a mentor or somebody that you trust and have an honest dialogue about your challenges? None of us are perfect. We're human beings, which means that by default, we are going to be imperfect. But in order for us to grow and change and build and grow who we are as people and grow as a community, we have to be willing to have these honest conversations and to allow ourselves to sit in conversations where we're going to get feedback. And I think a lot of the times the reasons why so many of us cannot accept constructive feedback or cannot accept that sort of dialogue is because we're just riddled with shame. A lot of us feel so much shame that we you know, anybody saying anything to us, even if the person is saying it out of love, it's difficult for us to hear it because shame does that. Shame shuts down our ability to look at ourselves because we already feel defective. And again, that is fed by the system of racism, the anti-blackness, the anti-woman, you know, whatever it is, we're going to feel bad about ourselves. We're riddled with so much shame that we find it difficult to have those conversations, number one, and then we find it even more difficult to have somebody have that conversation with us. So if you're in a relationship with someone and you're not able to stay open to what the other person is saying, then that can be a toxic trait in the relationship, because all you hear and all you want is your dialogue. You're not willing to have a conversation, and that's not a conversation. If all you're doing, if you're just stuck on what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and you're not thinking anything about what the other person is saying, that's not a relationship. You've got to be willing to stay open, even if what you think the other person is saying is wrong. It's important for you to hear what they've got to say, and you might not always agree with them. But it's toxic communication if you're in a relationship with someone and you're not willing to be open to what the other person is saying to you. You've got to be willing to hear the other person, and you can still honour what they said without agreeing with them. You don't have to agree with them, but it's important that you hear each other, because as soon as you start to hear the other person, that's when it opens up the dialogue from coming from a place of love. You know, it's got to come from a place of love. And when you start to hear the other person, or just allow yourself to breathe into the space and go, okay, let me just hear what the person is saying. Let me just hear if there's an element of truth that might be true in what they're saying. That's when the toxicity leaves the space, and you're able to really start to be open up to being in relationship, having a conversation that involves two people, not just from your point of view. And that's hard for a lot of us, because a lot of us were raised in homes where we weren't seen or we weren't heard. We weren't allowed to have a voice. We're not allowed to have a voice under the system of racism, and we weren't allowed to have a voice when we were children. So we feel like we have to shout, and we feel like we have to make up noise, and we feel like we have to because we weren't heard as children. Once you understand that's underneath the behaviour, again, that's what I was saying before about the historical wound. If you've got a historical wound which said that you weren't allowed to be seen or heard, you are going to make up noise in that relationship because you still think you're not being heard, or you're afraid, you're making up that person's not going to be able to hear you. So your behaviour can be toxic in that, or your communication is toxic in that relationship, because you've already made up your mind that you're not going to be heard. So that's why you're behaving in that relationship the way that you're communicating, because your thinking is already, I'm not going to be heard, I'm not going to be seen, they're going to think this, they're going to think that, and your fear is that you're not going to be seen and heard. So you're going to behave in a communicative way that is aggressive, inappropriate, or whatever, because the fear is that you're not going to be seen. And sometimes when you recognize that in yourself, you just can say to that person, I'm scared that you're not going to see me. I'm scared that you're not going to hear me. I'm scared that you're not going to understand. The minute you say that in the relationship, the minute you say that in the communication, that person is going to change their thinking. Because then you can work together to decide how you can be heard. What boundaries can you put in place so both of you can be seen? So that you can feel seen. And that might mean that you know, that you set a timer and that you say, okay, well, I'm going to speak for 5 minutes so that I can be heard. And I want you to reflect back to me what you think you heard, and then let's have a conversation about how we can resolve it. In a very, very simple terms, that is one way that you can start to communicate in a way that feels more loving. You know, that's number 6. You've got to be open to having a dialogue about feedback and about the communication style. And the last one, number 7, is about making sure that you understand the racism, white supremacy element of the toxicity. And a lot of people forget about that aspect. They just think, oh, you know, I'm having an argument with him, blah, 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 blah. How much of your internalized racism is part of that conversation? How much of your internalized racism is part of how you view your partner? Have you got unconscious anti-black conversations going on about what you think about black men? If you're not having these conversations with yourself about this stuff, honest conversations about this stuff is going to bleed into your relationships. You've both got to have an understanding of how racism impacts the black family and how it impacts black relationships and how it impacts how you feel about yourself. Because if you've internalized that stuff and you're not processing it, it's going to bleed into your relationship. And a lot of people miss that. And they're not having those conversations. Once you be able to have that conversation, it's going to have an impact on how you speak to each other, how you speak to yourself, and how you resolve it. Because there's going to be an element of racism, internalized racism, that is going to come out in that discussion. So that toxicity that is in our relationships, it's important to look at it again. Look at it holistically. Next time you're having you're in a relationship, you're having an argument with somebody, you know, that you're in a relationship with, take a pause and think about how those things, what I've just said about the racism and the historical stuff, go and take 10 minutes and go and sit with your journal and write a lot of this stuff out. Just do some bullet points. It ain't got to be no long essay or nothing, but just pause and think about the different elements of stuff that I've just spoken about and how it's impacting how you're having that conversation. How is it impacting how you communicate with your partner? That stuff listen, that stuff can be just gold dust. If you're willing to pause and have that relationship with yourself, having that dialogue with yourself, it can completely change and turn around the relationship that you're having with that partner. Because then that's you taking responsibility for your part in that relationship. That's you taking responsibility for the externalization of whatever's going on, the internalization, of what's happening with racism. It's going to have a completely different, outcome on how you feel about yourself. Instagram's going to cut me off in a little while, so I'm going to wrap up. But yeah, those are the 7 things. So I'm going to run through them really quickly. Hopefully Instagram won't cut me off. But so the 7 ways to know that you're the toxic person in a relationship is: number 1, you need to define what is toxic. Okay. Number 2, you need to look at your part. You've got to be willing to accept your part. How are you enabling that toxicity? Okay. Number 3, are you compulsively trying to change the other person? Are you stuck in the blame? Are you finger pointing? You did this, but not looking at your part in it. Yeah. Number 3 is compulsively trying to control the other. I think I've just said that one. Trying to control the other person. Are you obsessed with their behaviour? Are you obsessed with their phone? Who are they seeing? Who are they not seeing? Who are they looking at on social media? Let me look at your phone. Let me look at your laptop. Are you upset? Is that driving you bonkers? That's toxic behaviour. Number 4, are you externalising your worth? Are you only able to feel good about yourself when that other person is doing a certain thing? Do you feel anchored in who you are as a black woman without the need? It's nice to be complimented by somebody, but you're not driven by the other person saying those things. Yeah, that's the difference. So number 4 is about externalizing your worth. Number 5 is your behavior, is it triggered by an external wound? Have you got daddy issues? Have you got mother issues? Have you got sibling issues? Have you got old wounds that you haven't dealt with? Yeah, that you're still not dealing with. Number 6, are you open to feedback? Are you open to having a dialogue about your challenges and the defects and the behavior? Are you open to feedback? And number 7 is make sure that you remember to think about it holistically from a context of, has racism impacted how you feel about yourself? By Instagram, because it's going to cut me off in a minute. Has racism impacted how you feel about yourself? You need to be very, very clear with these things, and I promise you it's going to have a huge impact on how you show up in your relationships by having those conversations with yourself. Very, very powerful. If you would like more information on this stuff, you join us for the Racial Sobriety Conference for the rest of this week. We're going to be talking about shame. There's going to be loads of other things that we're going to be talking about that are going to be really helpful to you in terms of you anchoring your sense of self. If you are interested in doing some really, really deep work around this stuff, you can join Faith and Night in Ghana in November, or for the Father's Day workshop, which is going to be next Wednesday. Okay, thank you so much for joining me today. I don't take for granted that you take the time to spend with me today. If there's anything that I've shared today that you want to talk to me about in more detail, you can click the link in the bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. You can book a one-on-one session with me. If you know somebody else who would benefit from this, then tag them, share it with them. Thank you so much, Sarah, for tagging your friends and stuff in this live stream. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for joining me today, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow. There's going to be more father and daughter relationship stuff that's going to be going on for the rest of this week. So yeah, make sure the notifications are on so you know when I'm live. So take care of yourself, and I will see you next time. For those of you that are in that are already booked in for the conference, I will see you this evening when we're going to be talking about sponsorship. So I will see you then. Take care. Bye bye.